Do you know how residents living in the Arctic Circle obtain water? The icy river water, originating from glaciers, is refreshingly sweet and cool. Waking up in the morning, the outside temperature is minus 50 degrees Celsius. To keep the house warm, wood must be burned constantly, so the consumption of firewood is quite high. Andy's stock is nearly depleted, so today he needs to go out and gather more. He takes 2 chainsaws and sets off on his snowmobile, with his energetic dogs eager to run and release their energy. Soon, they arrive at a small forest. Andy prepares to start the chainsaw, but the weather is too cold, and the machine is frozen solid, unable to start. He tries his older chainsaw, but it also fails to ignite. Andy gathers some wood, builds a fire, and heats both chainsaws by placing them near the fire. After waiting a while, he tries to start the chainsaws again. This time, they successfully start. He begins to saw the timber on the ground. The chainsaw is powerful, and the thick logs are quickly cut through. Andy cuts the wood into segments for easy transport, loading them onto his sled until it's full. Andy returns home, and with over an hour left before dark, he still needs to fetch water. To extract water from the frozen Yukon River, he uses an auger to drill through the thick ice. He goes to the lake surface and begins drilling. Amid the roaring of the machine, the auger furiously cuts through the ice, quickly penetrating the layer. Water instantly sprays out as he breaks through. Andy starts collecting water. The Yukon's water, sourced from glaciers above, is of excellent quality and safe to drink directly. There is still flowing water beneath the ice layer, but in about a week, the river will be completely frozen. Therefore, Andy needs to collect extra water, as it won't be as easy next time. Sue decided to make a pair of snowshoes using willow branches. She cut some branches and brought them home, where she gently applied pressure to slowly bend them. She knew not to force them too much, or they would break. However, an accident happened, and a branch snapped. Undeterred, Sue picked up another branch and continued bending. As she bent it, she could feel the tension. She pressed on with the force, and, with a snap, the branch broke again. Frustrated but persistent, Sue grabbed a third branch. This time, she successfully bent it into a circular shape and secured it with rope, completing one frame. She then wove more rope back and forth, adding a few sticks in the middle to finish one snowshoe. Soon, she had made 2, with an extra one as a spare. Eager to try out her new equipment, Sue went out into the snow. She took out the small snowshoes, tied her feet to them with fabric, and tested them. They worked quite well, and she was delighted with her ingenuity, laughing heartily. Noticing some grouse tracks on the ground, Sue was ready to venture further. She started walking confidently but soon fell over in an awkward position. The snowshoes were not as functional as she hoped, and she didn't know how to get back up. After thinking it over, she decided to simplify things. She packed up the snowshoes, finding it smoother to walk directly on the snow. It was time to head home. Now it's a bright winter, and the sun doesn't set until 9:30 p.m. It's time for Chip and his group to go hunting. It's the season for catching reindeer, which is an important source of income for the Inuit living in the Arctic Circle. They are heading to Chiverik, where they will hunt reindeer, catch gray wolves, seal, and fish, among other activities. Before leaving, they need to check the snowmobile and spray it with white paint for camouflage. The two then set off and reach their destination before dark. Last summer, the Hailstone family built an elevated storage to keep their equipment, but now the roof has fallen in. Chip climbs up to dismantle the boards and retrieves the tent. If it had been frozen, it would have been a disaster. Without a tent, it is impossible to camp at minus 20 degrees Celsius. Agnes unfolds the tarp to check inside. Fortunately, it is dry. Together, they set up the tent and place snow blocks around it for insulation. Chip drives out to look for wood, which is crucial here for heating. When he returns, Agnes is chipping ice on the lake. Chip takes over the task with an axe, soon chipping off some ice blocks that will melt into drinking water. The Chips make their final preparations for hunting. Now they can focus on the hunt. Eric sets up a hunting trap under a tree, constructing an entrance with branches. He places a leg hold trap along the bait's path, using elk leg and some grouse as lure. The grouse, prepared since autumn, is slightly smelly but not rotten, an odor that's tempting to prey. Eric hangs the wings to attract animals' attention, then covers the trap with a thin layer of snow using an axe, and places the deer meat under the tree. This trap mainly targets lynx, but he's also prepared to catch mink. Both animals reproduce quickly and are a primary source of income for Alaska hunters. Eric ties a wire on a broken log to trap mink, which often fall for this type of trap. The two continue to set up another trap, finding walking much harder than riding a snowmobile, but their journey has a touch of romance. They advance along a frozen river, spotting beaver tracks with lynx tracks nearby, clearly following the beaver. They decide to set a trap in this area, hoping to catch the lynx. That night, they set several traps. A few days later, they check the traps. The first one remains undisturbed. The next also shows no catch, though there are signs of mink activity. The following trap was triggered, but the prey escaped. Eric resets the trap and moves on. The last trap also catches nothing. He reattaches the wings and hopes for better luck next time. Days later, they check the traps again. The cold weather doesn't stop them. At the first trap, the bait is gone, and the trap triggered, but no prey is caught. It seems a clever mink has struck again. Eric checks the next trap, finding the bait stolen there too, and the third trap is also tampered with by an experienced mink. Eric resets the traps and continues to the next. From a distance, they spot glowing eyes. Eric fires a shot at it, hitting a lynx. The mink escapes, but they catch a lynx, making their efforts over the past few days worthwhile. This is high-quality deer meat from the thigh of a moose. Eric is preparing to make delicious smoked meat. He first cuts off the bones, then separates the muscle tissues. The bones are good for making soup, as they are full of marrow. They cut the deer meat into pieces for easier smoking. To smoke the meat, Eric needs to build a smokehouse. He gathers some planks, cuts them to the same length, and begins constructing the frame using a nail gun to drive nails into the wood. They aim to build a small cabin, 1.8 meters deep and wide. Eric finds a thick log, cuts off the excess, drills a hole in it, and threads a rope through it to tie between the base and the smokehouse. This allows him to move the smokehouse with an ATV. He then secures metal sheets to the wooden frame with an electric drill, enclosing all sides and the roof. The front has a door, one half fixed in place while metal sheets are added to the door as well. He crafts a pair of door handles from antlers and a short piece of wood for the latch. Eric is very satisfied. Now he needs to drag it outside. He threads a rope through the base and secures it with a chain. Attempting to move it with a snowmobile proves too difficult, threatening to damage the vehicle. Switching to a truck, he moves forward slowly, eventually straightening the chain and pulling the smokehouse out. However, at the doorway, the base logs move inward, nearly collapsing the smokehouse. Amid his wife's screams, Eric stops, repositions the base logs, and secures them with 2 planks nailed in place. This time, he successfully drags the smokehouse to a temporary location. Next, they arrange the sliced meat on racks. Eric brings back some firewood and moves the stove into the smokehouse, using alder wood, which is ideal for smoking meat due to its fragrant smoke that infuses the meat, enhancing its flavor. As smoke fills the small house, they wait quietly. After a few hours, his wife prepares dinner. She takes a piece of meat from the top rack, slices the smoked deer meat to a moderate thickness, and cooks it in a hot pan with cooked onions. The combination of deer meat and onions is exceptionally tasty. She adds a vegetable salad to balance the meal, creating a delicious and fragrant dinner. Chip and his wife rode their snowmobile to hunt reindeer. Along the way, they encountered a fox. Agnes immediately gave chase, but in her excitement, she overturned the vehicle. Her rifle got stuck in the snowmobile, breaking the handle and piercing the fuel tank. Agnes was devastated. It was her favorite gun. She felt so sad she almost wanted to sit down and cry. Chip comforted her, reminding her that it was more important that she was unharmed. Agnes checked the vehicle. The handlebars were jammed, and the windshield was shattered into many pieces. It looked very pitiful. Chip, ever the supportive husband, quickly soothed his wife with a few words. They returned to camp and called a friend, asking him to bring another rifle. The friend arrived quickly, without hesitation. After a brief exchange of greetings, the friend left. Chip and his wife then set off again in search of reindeer. They spotted a herd of reindeer moving in a favorable direction. Reaching the top of a hill, Agnes took a shot at a reindeer and hit her target. They approached and found it was a young male. They had mistaken it for a female. They decided to make the best of the situation and took the meat back with them. Andy is making some traps for hunting carnivores because the area has a limited number of moose. Not only are hunters a threat, but carnivores are also keen on them. To ensure the healthy growth of moose, hunters occasionally cull wolves. Without moose, Andy's life would be difficult. He made a large trap. Wolves do not like to squeeze through small items. When a wolf enters the collar, it tightens and becomes difficult to open. Next, Andy prepares the bait. This year, he hunted a moose and kept its frozen innards. He smells them, confirming their strong scent will attract carnivores. With a chainsaw, Andy cuts the frozen innards, drills a hole, and plans to hang it from a tree. However, it is getting dark, so he decides to wait until tomorrow. The next day, Andy packs the deer meat and some dried fish and takes the traps with him. With the declining moose population, finding food in winter is increasingly difficult, impacting the survival of the residents. On his way, Andy notices wolf tracks following prey and decides it's a good spot to set traps. He hangs the deer innards on trees. Wolves have a keen sense of smell and will quickly detect the scent of the meat. Andy sets traps around the two baits, aiming to catch wolves, which helps the moose population and provides fur for sale to support his household. Soon, he finishes setting up several traps and heads home to warm up. A few days later, Andy checks the traps with his sled dogs heading up the mountain. They run at full speed to the destination. Andy goes alone to avoid startling any animals. He finds the traps and bait untouched and feels disappointed for not catching any wolves. Instead, he decides to trap minks, which can be sold to fur traders for money to buy dog food. Using an axe, he cuts a tree branch, sets a trap on the stump, and uses a fish head as bait. He sets another trap nearby and then returns home to wait. A few days later, Andy goes out again. The wolf traps are still empty, so he leaves them and checks the mink traps. From a distance, he sees a mink, already frozen, in one trap and another in the second trap. He is delighted with the two minks he caught. What is this meat that even glows faintly? It cuts effortlessly. A young couple, both food enthusiasts, are thrilled. The wife couldn't resist tasting it as soon as it was cut. Eric, more composed, knew to add some spices. He shook it, then tasted it, and was instantly excited. "This is what real delicacy is," he exclaimed. "Not even the finest steak or king crab can compare to this, not by a fraction. I could eat 50 of these in one sitting." This legendary dish is the tongue of a deer. Martha has completely fallen for it, becoming a devoted fan of deer tongue. This is in the Arctic Circle of Alaska. The story starts in the morning. Each year at this time, reindeer herds pass south of the Brooks Range, providing a brief opportunity. The couple drove to the valley. Upon arrival, Eric took out his binoculars and immediately spotted a black object moving. It was a muskox. In the bushes, just 9 meters from the muskox, was a reindeer. Soon, 2 more reindeer appeared, presenting a rare opportunity. The couple quietly approached. The reindeer silently watched their approach. Martha fired the trigger, causing the reindeer to flee. Eric then fired 3 shots. The muskox continued grazing, seemingly deaf. The couple went to check. Martha had hit a reindeer, and so had Eric. They decided to clean the animals right there. While Eric was cleaning the second reindeer, Martha went to bring the snowmobile. This hunt would feed them for months. Eric followed the tracks of a third reindeer, suspecting he had hit it, but wasn't sure. After walking over 90 meters, he found blood on the snow. He called his wife over. In Alaska, letting a wounded deer suffer is both illegal and unethical. With no bullets left, Eric resorted to the old way, using a knife to end the reindeer's suffering. They respect and cherish nature, and this land provides them with sustenance. They took the reindeer home, cut off the tongue, and boiled it in salt water for an hour and a half. Making delicious food is that simple. In a remote mountain cabin, a man named Glenn is butchering meat. Throughout the winter, he has processed a lot of moose, resulting in numerous scraps of meat, bones, and hides. His task is to handle each bone carefully, then throw it out the window, where a pile has accumulated, naturally attracting small animals and birds. Glenn once caught a mink that came to feed, but now, with bears about to awaken from hibernation, he urgently needs to clear the bones away to avoid a dangerous encounter. He loads all the remains onto a sled and transports them to a small island on the lake, where he has a dump site. Over the years, he has discarded bones and meat scraps there, which wolverines and bears know well and visit in spring to feed. Glenn also has another pressing matter. A few days ago, he hunted 5 reindeer in the forest. Unable to bring all back in one night, he gutted the fifth deer and buried it in the snow. Now he must retrieve it before carnivores discover it. On his way, he spots wolverine tracks and feels a chill. Wolverines are voracious and not only eat a lot, but also hide excess meat in the snow and create chaos by urinating and defecating over it. Feeling anxious, Glenn suddenly sees a white shadow dart from the bushes, a North American hare. Another hare takes off, and Glenn fires his gun but misses as the hare is too fast. He spots hare tracks under a tree, regretting the missed opportunity for a meal. Glenn continues and reaches the spot where he buried the reindeer. There are no animal tracks around, which somewhat relieves him. The snow is hard because he had piled it up, so he has to shovel with his snowshoes. Soon the deer's hooves emerge. He digs more and more of the reindeer becomes visible. Pulling hard on the deer's legs, he finally drags the frozen reindeer out. Glenn loads the reindeer onto his sled and heads back. Weighing over 200 pounds, the deer is not easy to pull, but the descent makes it easier, and he slides all the way home. Glenn finally arrives with a smile of relief. Pour boiling hot water on a trap to remove human scent. In the morning, Chip stepped out of the tent into poor weather. It was gloomy, with poor visibility and fierce cold winds, making it unsuitable for hunting reindeer. So, he decided to set traps to catch fur-bearing animals. Fur is an important source of income and trade locally. Chip catches fewer animals but earns more money. Other hunters need to catch 50 foxes to make $1,000. But Chip only needs 5 because his wife can make 5 hats from them. Technology is the key productive force here, and there is less competition. Chip is quite proud of this. To remove human scent from the trap materials, Agnes filled a kettle with snow, added some willow twigs, and heated it until it boiled. She then poured this over the traps. The couple drove to their usual hunting spot, using salmon and smoked meat as bait, and less tasty bacon as a side dish. Foxes like this kind of junk food. After setting the traps, Chip left some deer hair to create a fake kill scene to confuse the foxes. He set several more traps in the same way, and then waited. A few hours later, Chip went to check the traps, while Agnes, on a repaired snowmobile, went looking for grouse. The first trap was undisturbed, but the bait in the second had disappeared, likely taken by a wolverine that played him for a fool. Agnes found some grouse. They are hard to spot in the snow, but Agnes has sharp eyesight and shot too. She went to find Chip, who was still setting traps. Agnes brought the grouse, and Chip used the meat and scattered the remains around the traps. Then they headed back to enjoy delicious grouse soup. In the evening, a fox appeared near their camp, bouncing around unabashedly. Chip chose not to shoot and let it go. They went to check the traps and found a fox caught in one. Agnes killed it, and they obtained a fine fur. Ironically, it was another fox, highlighting how different treatments can be. Glenn caught 5 reindeer in one go, a bounty too large for one person to consume, especially with spring approaching. He needed to build a rack to preserve the deer meat. It was a beautiful day, perfect for working outdoors. First, he looked for 4 sturdy trees. Most trees around were alive, which he wouldn't cut down. He searched for trees that were half dead. Glenn swung his axe, chopping down a tree with a single push, causing it to fall with a loud crash. He continued, felling a second tree which narrowly missed the camera. He cut down a total of 4 trees to use as posts and dragged them back home. Near his home, he chose a spot covered in ice to set up the rack. Glenn planned to drill 4 holes, striking the ground with an iron rod, until he had made a hole about 10 centimeters deep. He inserted the wooden posts into these holes. They stood upright perfectly. Glenn then went to a nearby ice-covered puddle, broke the ice with a stick, collected water in a cup, and poured it into the holes. The water would soon freeze, securing the posts. Using the same method, Glenn erected all 4 posts, filling each hole with enough water to ensure they would freeze solid overnight. The next day, Glenn sawed the tops of the posts to prepare for placing a frame to support the crossbeams, which needed to be strong enough to hold the meat of 5 reindeer. His challenge was preserving the meat, and he planned to make jerky. Glenn carved notches at both ends of a horizontal beam and fitted it onto the vertical posts to form a rectangular frame. Next, he inserted a central beam, which was heavy but perfect for the structure. He lifted it with all his strength and tied the beam to the horizontal poles to prevent it from rolling. He then used shorter pieces of wood to complete the roof. Glenn cut notches on the posts and added a crossbar on each side. As the sun was setting, he had to stop for the day. On the third day, Glenn collected some wood, stripped the bark, and placed it between the crossbars to create a rack for hanging the meat. He covered the roof with a waterproof tarp, completing the meat rack. Next was hanging the meat. He took a reindeer hind leg with the skin still on, which served as protection. Glenn hung the leg on the rack. Now that the skin was no longer needed, he carefully skinned it with a knife. The leg was large, and to speed up drying, he sliced it into thin strips. His skilled knife work ensured the meat was cut thinly, making the strips tough enough to hang without falling and easier to freeze. Glenn hung the first piece of meat on the rack, marking a good start. He lives here because he truly enjoys this lifestyle and values the freedom it brings. Chip was going to check his traps as the weather warmed, signaling that their winter hunting season was nearing its end. Before returning to Norvik, he had one last chance to catch prey. Lately, the weather on the mountain had been terrible, forcing them to stay lower where lynx were commonly found. Therefore, Chip set several traps in the area. On the way, something felt off. Suddenly, the snowmobile died and wouldn't start again, likely due to a broken crankshaft. Chip had to walk back. Agnes was chipping ice for drinking water when she saw Chip walking back and looked curious. Her snowmobile had also broken down before and had only been temporarily fixed. Chip planned to combine the two vehicles, transferring his fuel tank to his wife's snowmobile. They drove to retrieve the broken snowmobile and towed it back. Chip removed the damaged parts and installed the fuel tank. As dusk approached, Agnes went inside to cook dinner while Chip continued working on the vehicle. He managed to fix the snowmobile before dark. They planned to get a good night's sleep and hunt the next day. The following day, they drove to a reindeer gathering area. They spotted a small group of reindeer and approached from upwind. The reindeer noticed the intruders and fled. Agnes took aim and fired, but missed as the reindeer sprinted away, kicking up snow. She stood and fired again, but still missed. Most of the reindeer had disappeared, but one stopped in its tracks. Agnes shot again and hit a plump doe, round in shape. Pleased with their catch, they were ready to head home. Eric and his wife, Martha, went fishing. At this time of year, the reindeer migrate, birds return, and nature begins to revive. It's also the last chance for snow travel. The river ice was starting to melt, making crossing dangerous. Eric had Martha hold on tightly as he expertly navigated the terrain, showing off his driving skills before reaching the lake. Eric drilled 4 holes in the ice using a spiral auger. He used deer meat as bait, hanging it on hooks and dropping them into the holes. This setup included an automatic alert system. The red object was a float, which was bent and hooked. When a fish bit the bait, the float would pop up, signaling a catch. Martha chuckled at this. Growing up in a fishing area, she preferred to rely on sight or instinct, considering watching floats a novice's behavior. She threw her hook into the hole, having honed her fishing skills from a young age. Sitting quietly and patiently in the cold is not easy, but Martha managed to keep busy while Eric, out of boredom, started picking his nose. The ice holes began to refreeze, yet no fish appeared. Eric grew restless, especially when he saw grouse flying around. His interest piqued. He took his handgun for a walk. Martha felt resigned. Just 3 hours in, and Eric was already impatient. She thought, "This man is unreliable. Fishing is up to me." Eric wandered nearby, occasionally checking the floats, enjoying the multitasking. He found grouse tracks on the ground and spotted one in a tree, with several more below. Quietly aiming, the ground grouse ran merrily. Eric finally shot, first hitting the one in the tree, then one on the ground. The rest flew away, leaving him with 2 grouse. By the time he returned, it was dark, and Martha hadn't caught any fish. It was time to head home. Back home, they cleaned the grouse, and Martha cooked a delicious dinner. Though they caught no fish, the chicken made their mood delightful. This is country life, full of surprises and delights. 3 months have passed since Glenn built his meat rack, and he has been eating dried meat ever since, which he is now tired of. With spring in the air and birds returning, especially the plump ducks, it was time for Glenn to switch up his diet. The ice on the lake was starting to melt, especially near the shore, where it had formed a channel attracting many wild ducks. This was Glenn's hunting ground. He walked along the shore, observing silently, but after several kilometers, he still hadn't spotted any ducks. This was common in the Arctic Circle, where few creatures survive, and hunting often requires covering long distances. Finally, he spotted a few ducks in a water channel ahead. Hiding behind a tree, Glenn calculated his distance from the ducks, 68 meters. To increase his accuracy, he needed to get closer. The ducks, unaware of the danger, continued to play happily. Seizing the moment, Glenn finally fired his gun. The ducks were startled and flew up instantly. But one remained on the lake, hit by the shot, and drifting with the current until it floated to the shore where Glenn picked it up. Under the bright sunlight, there was nothing more pleasant than sitting by the river plucking the duck. Occasionally bird calls could be heard, and Glenn noticed a bird that laid blue eggs, signaling new life. Glenn felt great. Used to the monotony of winter, the variety of spring was refreshing. The ducks he had startled returned, and Glenn felt a thrill. The ducks had let down their guard, and he quietly approached again. Suddenly, one duck flew away, triggering Glenn's reflexes. He fired 2 shots and hit another wild duck. Although he had caught 2 ducks that day, Glenn wasn't ready to stop. The ice was melting quickly, and his window for hunting was limited. After spotting 4 more ducks ahead, he approached and fired again, hitting one in flight. A breeze blew the duck towards him, but it got tangled in the aquatic plants near the shore. The lake bottom was soft and muddy, and the water was icy cold, so Glenn didn't want to enter the water. Instead, he sawed off a small tree, tied it to a rope, and threw it towards the duck. His first throw fell short, and his second was still not far enough. After removing more branches and trying again, he finally succeeded. Now it was time to enjoy a feast. Glenn placed 3 ducks in an iron pot, which sizzled as he covered it, preparing to slow roast them. The longer they cooked, the better they tasted. When he lifted the lid, an amazing aroma wafted up. The wild duck was perfectly roasted. Having only dried deer meat for a while, tasting fresh meat was incomparable. The tender duck meat was melt-in-your-mouth delicious, and Glenn was completely captivated by this culinary delight. Living a similarly refined life is another man named Jesse. He resides alone in a small cabin by the Nenana River, accompanied by 40 sled dogs. His life revolves around these dogs, ensuring they are well fed with quality fish and meat. For a delicious meat soup, he adds dried fish, but these are his last reserves. He needs to catch new fish to afford the costs of keeping his dogs. Having just finished cooking a stew rich in protein, fat, and water, Jesse knows this is the dog's favorite. The sled dogs sustain his life in Alaska. Jesse competes in 4 to 5 races each year to help support his household, and fishing is a crucial part of this. He needs about 4,000 fish a year to maintain this lifestyle. However, his boat has several holes and urgently needs repairs. Fortunately, he learned carpentry skills in the past and can do the work himself. Jesse prepares to flip the boat over by first hammering a nail into the wall and setting up a pulley system. He quickly tightens the line, then uses all his strength to flip the boat over. Now he can start the repairs. He applies glue, covers it with waterproof paper, secures it with a wooden board, and finishes with a coat of paint. The boat looks as good as new. Next, he needs to get the boat to the river, but his truck doesn't have a hitch capable of doing the job. However, he has a secret weapon, a bicycle. This is a completely new attempt using the bicycle, which seems quite unexpected. It was never meant to bear such heavy pressure and starts to operate under duress. It nearly falls apart, wobbling as it struggles forward, wishing it could just end it all. But Jesse firmly controls it, making it endure beyond what it's built to handle. Since it can't fight back, it races ahead at full speed. Together, they make it to the riverbank. The bicycle finally completes its bizarre mission. The Hailstone family started their spring camping trip again. They were at the Chivarik River, a resource-rich area. Chip and his wife, along with their 5 daughters, carried the tents together. Migrating reindeer were everywhere, but Chip and his family did not shoot any. Setting up camp was the priority. The women, strong and determined, helped efficiently, embodying a steely will throughout their lives. Soon, they reached their destination and felt rain approaching. They began setting up the tents, and after some busy work, they had the basic living conditions ready and went to sleep deeply. The family continued to improve the campsite. The 3 daughters went to fetch water from the river, which had no water supply system. The river water, though a bit murky, would settle and become clear. One daughter, from the lookout tower, spotted reindeer. Agnes picked up the gun. There were 3 reindeer ahead, a doe with its fawn and another female deer. They would not hunt a mother with its calf, so they focused on the female deer. Agnes took her shot but missed high. After readjusting, she successfully hit her target on the second try, marking their first catch of the trip, which they then dragged back to the camp. With the deer meat secured, they needed vegetables for a perfect dinner. They decided to gather some local roots called musu, which are sweet and somewhat potato-like. The family set out by boat, aiming for a sandbar where musu was likely to grow. The slightly brownish roots they were looking for were musu. They split up to search. They tasted the musu right away, finding it sweet and delicious. The area was abundant with musu, and the family began collecting them enthusiastically, especially the two youngest daughters, who found it very fun. Soon they had gathered plenty, and it was time to return. Back at camp, Chip prepared a rich meal. He used the heart and tongue to make a soup, adding musu and onions. After waiting a while, dinner was ready. The family gathered, eating meat and chatting together, filling the air with laughter and happiness. This warmth seemed to move the heavens, and soon it started to rain.